the moon may not be what we think it is, there are still many unanswered questions. So what is the moon? This is by Collective Spark, Arjun Walia Collective Revolution. It's not out of the question that artifacts of these visits still exist, or even that some kind of base is maintained, possibly automatically, within the solar system to provide continuity for successive expeditions because of weathering and the possibility of detection and interference by the inhabitants of the Earth. It would be preferable not to erect such a base on the Earth's surface. The moon seems to a one reasonable alternative. Forthcoming high-resolution photographic reconnaissance of the moon from space vehicles, particularly of the backside, that is the far side, might bear these possibilities in mind. This is a quote by Carl Sagan. Controversy has surrounded the moon for a long time. We have leaks, research, and information from some very credible sources that have, over a span of decades, been relayed to the public that our moon is not what we think it is, and that there's also some type of extraterrestrial presence on the moon. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. One example would be the testimony of Colonel Ross Dickerson, who was responsible for maintaining the inventory of the nuclear weapons stockpile for the United States. He had a long stint with the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. Shortly before his passing, he told the world that the U.S. tried to detonate atomic weapons on the moon for scientific purposes, measurement and whatnot, and that this project was halted by extraterrestrials who would not allow us to detonate any nuclear weapons in space, let alone the moon. These were some interesting comments because he's one of the hundreds of high-ranking military people who have alluded to such things, and we also have a declassified report by the Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center from June 1959 that shows how seriously they were considering this plan. It was called Project A119. We know for a fact that they wanted to investigate the capability of weapons in space, and if they did, we also know that we would never be told, similar to the testing that goes on here on our planet Earth. And then we have remote viewers from the Stargate program who have quote-unquote seen strange structures and humanoid creatures on the moon, like Ingo Swann from his book titled Penetration, for example. He wasn't the only one from the program who did. I have personally had conversations with Dr. Paul Smith, a retired Army veteran who spent a decade in that program, and he also relayed to me that something strange is in fact happening on the moon. Many from within that program have been very outspoken about an extraterrestrial presence. Now, there is even a WikiLeaks document that claims that the US built a base on the moon decades ago. Multiple whistleblowers have also spoken of strange structures on the moon, and it's become so obvious that some academicians are trying to do what they can to bring it to attention. For example, a recently published paper in the Journal of Space Exploration about certain features on the far side of the moon that appear in the crater Paracelsus C, titled Image Analysis of Unusual Structures on the Far Side of the Moon in the crater Paracelsus C. It argues that these features might be artificial in origin, meaning someone other than a human being built them and put them there. It's not just the moon. A physicist from the University of Texas Institute, Dr. Horace Crater, recently published a paper in the Journal of Space Exploration that, along with the NASA Viking images, hints strongly at artificial surface interventions. One of them being, as we know, the Mars moon Phobos with the monolith on there. Who put it there and why? Now, the list goes on, it's long, and the idea that somebody else is on the moon is nothing new. Even the deputy manager of the Clementine mission to the moon in 1995 said it was really a photo reconnaissance mission to check out structures on the far side of the moon that was not put there by humans. But this article is not about what's on the moon, it's about exactly what the moon is. Now we know that yesterday I posted a video saying that NASA wants to put onto the far side of the moon a new telescope, so that the telescopes would not have the interference that we have if the telescope was placed on Earth's surface. Now, going back to this, it's also noteworthy to mention that the United States has been criticized by Russia for concealing artifacts that they collected from the moon. Now, what is the moon? Perhaps strangest of all the anomalies are the many indications that the moon may be hollow. Studies of moon rocks indicate that the moon's interior differs from Earth's mantle in many ways, suggesting a very small core or no core at all in the moon. In 1962, there was a study and it found the interior of the moon to be less dense than the exterior, according to Jim Mars from his Our Occulted History. Now, is the moon hollow? Many intellectual minds seem to think so, but despite what's really being talked about, these theories are still considered unconventional by the mainstream, who like to push their own theories and teach them as fact. Perhaps the reason why the US has not disclosed their artifacts from the moon, including all of the rocks, is because from what we do have, studies of moon rocks have shown that the moon's interior is far different from the Earth's mantle, which suggests a very small core or no core at all. In 1962, Gordon MacDonald, a NASA scientist, published a study that stated, indeed, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere. And according to MIT's Sean Solomon, he said the lunar orbiter experiments vastly improved our knowledge of the moon's gravitational field, indicating the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow, he said. The most startling evidence that the moon could be hollow came in November 20th, 1969, when the Apollo 12 crew, after returning from their command ship, sent a lunar module, the LM, ascent stage crashing back onto the moon, and that created an artificial moonquake. The LM struck the surface about 40 miles from Apollo 12 landing site, where super-sensitive seismic equipment recorded something both unexpected and astonishing. The moon reverberated like a bell for more than 1 hour. A bell! Frank Press of MIT stated, quote, "None of us have seen anything like this on Earth. In all our experience, it was quite an extraordinary event. That this rather small impact produced a signal which lasted 30 minutes is quite beyond the range of our experience," end quote. Now, how did the moon get to where it is? Conventional wisdom tells us that, yes, the moon may have originated somewhere else and at some point came to orbit our planet. It tells us that it was formed from debris after a space object smashed into Earth, while another theory states that Earth captured the moon via its gravitational pull when it was wandering through the solar system. So this is not evidence. This is, of course, just theories. Now, despite that our current theories are accepted as fact, there is absolutely no evidence for the conventional hypothesis. According to Russian scientist Isaac Asimov, an American writer and professor of biochemistry at Boston University, he said, "It's too big to have been captured by Earth. The chances of such a capture having been effected in the moon, then having taken up nearly circular orbit around our Earth, are too small to make such an eventuality credible," he said. Asimov also emphasized that we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon by rights ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept, he said. Now, there were other members of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Vasin and Shcherbakov in 1970, run by the Russian government, and they published an article titled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" This article offered another explanation for how the moon may have been created. This seems to be a better hypothesis because there is actually a considerable amount of evidence that points towards something suspicious happening on the moon. NASA scientist Robin Brett said, "It's easier to explain the non-existence for the moon than its existence. The best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist, Erwin Shapiro, Harvard Astrophysics said. Think about it. The moon is in a nearly perfect circle when it comes to its origin, all the while being synchronized with its period of revolution, so only one side always faces our Earth. As Mars points out, this circular orbit is especially odd, considering that the moon's center of mass lies more than a mile closer to Earth than its geometric center. This fact alone should produce an unstable, wobbly orbit, much as a ball, when its mass off-center, will not roll in a straight line. Now, were the Sumerians on to something? Many within this field are really into ancient Greek and ancient Sumerian lore. Take Apollo 12 astronaut Al Worden, for example, who made some very interesting comments about the Sumerians as well as extraterrestrial life on a live interview, and there's a link here if you want. Now, in the late 1960s, a senior scientist from the Planetary Science Institute, William Kenneth Harmon, stated he believes that the moon results from a collision between Earth and another body at least the size of Mars. This became known as the Big Whack Theory, and it correlated the story told in ancient Sumerian tablets. According to several interpretations, the Sumerian tablets, most notably from Zechariah Sitchin more than 4 billion years ago, a large watery world called Tiamat, was in orbit between Mars and Jupiter. Nibiru, or Planet X as we know, the planet that supposedly enters into our solar system once every 3,600 years, yes, caused Tiamat to crack under gravitational stress. Tiamat was cracked in half when one of Nibiru's moons knocked it into it and also knocked a large portion of Mars. This is interesting because recently scientists have confirmed that Mars used to be a very watery world, an Earth-like planet. There's even large amounts of evidence for ancient life on Mars before what appears to be a dramatic climate shift. Scientists hypothesize that the climate shift was a result of a large collision. The larger chunk of Tiamat became planet Earth. So it's interesting to make that connection. Now, going back to the moon, Mars says it's important to remember that something had to put the moon at or near its present circular pattern around the Earth, just as an Apollo spacecraft circling the Earth every 90 minutes, while 100 miles high, has to have a velocity of roughly 18,000 miles per hour to stay in orbit. So something had to give the moon a precisely required velocity for its weight and altitude. The point, and it is one seldom noted in considering the origin of the moon, is that it is extremely unlikely that any object would just stumble into the right combination of factors required to stay in orbit. Something had to put the moon at its altitude, on its course, and at its speed. The question is, what was that something? It's hard to believe that the precise stationary orbit of the moon is simply a coincidence. It's also a coincidence. Is it a coincidence that the moon is at just the right distance from Earth to completely cover the sun during an eclipse? While the diameter of the moon is a mere 2,160 miles against the sun's gigantic 864,000 miles, it's nevertheless in just the proper position to block out all of the sun's flaming corona when it moves between the sun and the Earth, Mars explains. Now, according to Asimov, there is no astronomical reason why the moon and the sun should fit so well. It's the sheerest of coincidences, and only the Earth among all the planets is blessed in this fashion. With all of the evidence that has surfaced showing an extraterrestrial presence on the moon, to me, the spaceship theory proposed by Michael Vastin and Alexander Sherbakov, mentioned above, makes the most sense. This is what Asimov states. Now, according to Mars, the spaceship moon theory may come closer than any other in reconciling the contradictions inherent in the origin and amazing orbit of the moon. However, such a consideration is supposed to be outside the discussion of educated and rational people. The circular logic of conventional science regarding the origins of the moon runs something like this. We know that extraterrestrials don't exist, but we do not know that the moon we do know that the moon exists and has been mentioned throughout human history. We humans did not create it or place it in orbit around the Earth. It must have been done by extraterrestrials, but because we know they don't exist, we will simply call it an anomaly and will not publicly say any more about it. This was originally from Collective Evolution, published here under Creative Commons on Collective Spark. Please leave your comments about this. Thank you so much for your support.